My son-in-law and his family went insane when they learned my daughter was pregnant with a girl. They kicked her out of the house, calling her a useless woman. I took her in and cared for her. 3 years later, her ex-husband's family showed up on my doorstep and froze when they saw the little girl. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's reached. It was a Saturday afternoon under a late summer shower. The damp, cool air blanketed the small neighborhood. I was in my cozy kitchen, my hands full of dough, skillfully shaping round, fragrant, sweet dinner rolls. From the bedroom, I could hear the clear laughter of my two grandchildren watching cartoons, probably that stuffed bear show they love so much. Then the doorbell rang, two firm, impatient rings, as if the person outside wasn't accustomed to waiting. I froze, my fingers still coated in flour, motionless for a moment. My heart started to beat faster. A bad feeling crept into my gut. I wiped my hands on my old, worn apron and walked toward the door, my feet heavy, as if I already knew what awaited me. I opened the door. Under the awning, a sleek black Mercedes was parked right in front of the gate, a luxury that had never been seen in this neighborhood. Standing before me was Julian, my former son-in-law, the person I least wanted to see again. He wore an expensive suit, though it was slightly wrinkled. His hair was slicked back by the rain, and drops sliding down his sunken cheeks gave him an air far removed from the elegant man he used to be. His eyes were lowered, unable to meet mine. Beside him were his parents, Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne. Mr. Thomas stood erect, broad-shouldered with a severe face, like a man used to giving orders. Mrs. Eleanor, as always, displayed a practiced smile with intense red lipstick, but her gaze was icy. In her hands, she held a large basket wrapped in gleaming cellophane, filled with expensive California wine and imported fruit. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Peterson," she said in an overly sweet voice. "It's raining so hard that, passing by here, we wanted to take the opportunity to say hello." She extended the basket toward me, as if it were an offering of reconciliation, an attempt to buy my goodwill. "We miss the boy very much," she continued, drawing out the words dramatically. "Children need a complete family, don't you think?" Her words were like a sharp, cold knife, though coated in honey. I looked at the basket and then into her eyes. I felt a knot in my chest. I knew they hadn't come out of affection. I didn't accept the basket. I stepped back, opening the door wider, and maintained a serene expression, even though everything inside me was trembling. "Please come in, it's raining out," I said in a neutral tone, as if receiving mere visitors. They stepped inside, and the sound of their footsteps echoed on the old wooden floor. Their eyes swept over the small living room, where the children's toys were scattered on the chairs and the floor. I could see the judgment in Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, comparing my simple home to their ostentatious mansion. Mr. Thomas sat stiffly on the sofa, not relaxing for an instant. Julian remained standing, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if he wished to disappear. I went to the kitchen and poured 3 cups of chamomile tea. I placed them on the table, trying not to let them see the tremor in my hands. Mrs. Eleanor resumed her role, her voice sweet but calculated. "We know we made mistakes, but in these 3 years, we haven't had a restful night. We just want to compensate our grandson." She pronounced grandson with intentional emphasis, like an arrow aimed straight at my heart. I knew they had heard the rumors, that they knew about Matthew, but they didn't know the whole truth, and I wasn't about to let them get what they wanted so easily. I smiled faintly, a smile without any warmth, only to conceal the contempt growing inside me. Without responding to her, I turned and walked toward the back of the house, calling out loud enough for Amanda, my daughter, to hear. "Amanda, bring the child out to greet your grandparents." There was a firmness in my voice that I hadn't known I possessed, as if I were preparing for a battle. Noises came from the inner room, and then the bedroom door opened. Amanda emerged, her face serene yet determined, like someone who has endured too much pain to still feel fear. In her arms she held Lily, my granddaughter, dressed in pink pajamas with little bunnies on them. Her dark blonde, slightly curly hair was just like Julian's, but her bright black eyes she had inherited from her mother. Lily yawned, hugging Amanda's neck, oblivious to the tension filling the room. The 3 Hawthorns froze. Eleanor's smile was plastered to her face as if she had just been slapped. Julian snapped his head up, his eyes wide, his lips trembling, unable to utter a word. Thomas, always so composed, couldn't hide his confusion either. His voice sounded broken, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. What? What does this mean? It's a girl. I stood there in silence, looking directly into their eyes. I let them sink into their own conjectures. 3 years earlier, the day Amanda wore that snow-white wedding dress, I thought my daughter's life had finally found a safe harbor. I was there in the Hawthorne's splendid garden, where yellow lights hung from the trees, shining like a dream. White roses and orchids adorned the place, their sweet fragrance floating in the air. I took my daughter's hand and led her down the white gravel path toward the altar. Taking the place of her deceased father, Amanda's dress gently brushed the ground with a long, elegant train like a cloud. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with happiness. As I gave her to Julian, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion, "Be very happy, both of you." Julian, in his impeccable black tuxedo, looked at me sincerely and nodded firmly, as if taking an oath. I believed him. I believed he would protect my daughter as my husband had protected me during his life. The first months after the wedding, everything seemed perfect. Every weekend, Julian drove his shiny Cadillac and brought Amanda to visit me. He brought bags full of presents, pastries from a famous New York City bakery, fresh imported fruit, and once even a bottle of wine he said was special from Napa Valley. He laughed, spoke enthusiastically, and talked about his family's real estate business and the trips he took with Amanda to places I could only dream of. "Don't worry, Mom, Amanda is my princess now," he would say with pride in his voice. I would look at my daughter and see her smiling, radiant, with rosy cheeks. I thought life was finally smiling upon her, making up for the difficult years in that small house where it was just the two of us, relying on each other after her father's death. Sometimes Amanda spoke to me about her mother-in-law, Eleanor, with a certain caution. "My mother-in-law is demanding, but not mean, Mom," she would say softly, trying to reassure me. "She just insists a lot that I have to give this family a son to carry on the lineage." I felt a chill, but I wanted to believe it was just a custom of rich people, those who want everything to be perfect according to their rules. I tried to push away the worry, convincing myself that Amanda would be loved in that house as I had always loved her. One day, Amanda announced she was pregnant. I remember that moment perfectly. I was sitting on the porch, having a cup of chamomile tea. The phone rang, and I heard Julian's excited voice. "Mom, Amanda is pregnant. We're going to have a baby." My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of happiness. I imagined holding my grandchild, hearing a child's laughter filling this house. The Hawthorns organized a party to celebrate and invited me. The mansion was brightly lit. Servants came and went nonstop, and on the table were dishes I had never seen in my life. Mrs. Eleanor raised her glass of wine, smiled proudly, and declared, "This will be the pride of the Hawthorne family." I sat there, feeling out of place among so much luxury, but with a warm heart. However, that happiness didn't last long. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the patio, the phone rang again. It was Amanda. Her voice was trembling, completely unlike her usual cheerful self. "Mom," she said in a whisper, on the verge of breaking, "I just came out of the ultrasound. The doctor said it's a girl." I didn't manage to reply. There was only a long silence on the other end, followed by the sound of a glass shattering. Then Eleanor's sharp, cruel voice thundered, unaware that I was listening. "A girl? How useless. The Hawthorns don't need a useless mouth like that." That word, useless, felt like a knife directly to my chest. I called Amanda, but the line abruptly cut off. I dialed her number again and again, then Julian's, but no one answered. Dozens of calls, not a single reply. I felt that something terrible was coming. An indescribable fear squeezed my chest. Exactly 1 week later, at midnight, the phone rang again. I jumped up, my hands trembling as I picked it up. It was Amanda's number. "Mom, help me!" Her voice was broken by sobs, and the whistling wind coming through the receiver. "They kicked me out of the house." I didn't think about anything else. I grabbed my old coat, got into my rusty pickup truck, and sped off into the torrential rain. It was raining so hard that the windshield wipers were useless. But I didn't care. I only thought of Amanda, my daughter, whom I had sworn to protect my whole life. When I arrived at the Hawthorne mansion, the scene chilled my soul. Amanda, her belly already prominent, was kneeling in front of the locked gate. The rain soaked her completely, her hair stuck to her face, her shoulders shaking. Her suitcase had been thrown outside. It was open, and the baby's clothes floated in the puddles. Those tiny outfits, the wool bonnets I myself had knitted, were now covered in mud. I looked up at the second-floor window and saw Julian's silhouette just for a second before the curtain was abruptly drawn. He didn't even have the courage to face us. I ran through the rain and embraced her. "Amanda, it's me, Mom," I whispered, my voice thick. I took off my coat and put it over her, trying to shield her from the cold. Amanda looked up, her eyes red, her face pale. "Mom, I'm sorry," she sobbed. I didn't let her finish. I helped her stand up. I slowly guided her toward the truck. I picked up every piece of clothing, every tiny sock, trying to hold back my tears. I couldn't let her see me weak, not now. When I placed my hand on her shoulder to guide her into the vehicle, I held her tightly, my heart shattered. And within me, a silent promise resonated. From today, no one will ever hurt my daughter again. No one. The day after bringing Amanda home, I immediately set about cleaning her old room. It was a small room at the end of the hall, the place where she had grown up with her youthful dreams. I pulled back the curtains to let in the sunlight. I dusted the old desk and carefully put away the wedding photos Amanda had hung on the wall. She helped me in silence, not saying a word, folding the blankets with slow movements as if trying to fold away the wounds in her heart as well. The first few nights I woke up startled by Amanda's muffled crying in the next room. Her sobs were so faint, as if she didn't want me to hear them. But in that small house, every sound was amplified. One night, unable to bear it anymore, I gently pushed open the door. In the dim light of the lamp, I saw Amanda curled up in bed, hugging her belly, murmuring, "Forgive me, son, forgive me." Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. I walked over, sat down beside her, and embraced her. "You have nothing to blame yourself for, Amanda," I told her, my voice trembling. "You are the strongest person I know." I started cooking the most nutritious dishes I knew, the same ones my mother used to prepare for me when I was pregnant with Amanda. Black bean soup with the aroma of cumin, chicken broth with ginger, and fresh orange juice squeezed with my own hands. "You have to eat for yourself and the baby," I would tell her as I placed the plate in front of her. Amanda would just nod, pick up the spoon, but her gaze remained empty. I took her for a walk every afternoon around the neighborhood, through tree-lined streets. I hoped the fresh air and the bird song would restore some of her peace, but the neighbors' glances, their curious expressions, and the whispers behind our backs made Amanda drop her head. "Mrs. Peterson, your daughter was abandoned by her husband, wasn't she?" a neighbor bluntly asked me while I was buying groceries at the local market. I smiled coldly and replied, "My family's business is for me to handle." But inside, I felt a deep pain. I suffered not just for Amanda, but for how cruel the world could be to her. A week later, Julian's lawyer called. His voice was smooth, overly polite, and he asked for an appointment to finalize the divorce proceedings. I looked at Amanda, waiting for her reaction. She nodded, her gaze tired but firm. "Let's go, Mom," she said. We went to a small diner, not a fancy office as I had imagined. The tables were old wood. The smell of roasted coffee permeated the air, and a hanging lamp dimly lit the place, like a silent mockery. Julian appeared, his eyes cold, not giving Amanda a single glance. He sat across from us next to his lawyer, as if he had only come to close a deal. He placed a check on the table, with a figure so high it took my breath away. He pushed the paper toward Amanda and said in a monotone voice, "Take it, and don't ever appear in front of me again." I looked at my daughter, waiting to see what she would do. Amanda looked at the check, then lifted her eyes, staring directly into his. For the first time, her gaze neither wavered nor showed fear. "I don't need your money," she said, her voice clear and firm. She pushed the check back with a decisive gesture, like someone marking an end. Julian smiled with contempt, a sneer full of arrogance. He signed the divorce papers with a strong, dry stroke, as if wanting to erase Amanda from his life. Before leaving, he said with an icy voice, "I don't have any children. That baby never existed to me." His words were the final blow, cutting off any hope that might have remained in Amanda's heart. I took her hand under the table, trying not to let her see me cry. A few months later, on a stormy night, as Amanda and I were folding the baby clothes she had prepared so carefully, she suddenly cried out, clutching her hands to her belly. "Ma, it hurts so much," she whispered, her face as pale as wax. I was terrified when I saw her water had broken, a month earlier than expected. I immediately called the ambulance, but the voice on the other end of the line told me the storm had knocked down trees and blocked the roads. There was no time to lose. I loaded Amanda into my old truck and drove off through the curtain of rain. The water was halfway up the tires. The wind whistled against the windows, but I didn't feel fear. I only thought of one thing: getting my daughter to a safe place. The local community clinic was small and lacked resources. There was only one elderly doctor with completely white hair and two young nurses with worried expressions. The delivery room was simple with a strong smell of disinfectant. Amanda writhed in pain, clutching my hand, her nails digging into my skin. I stayed by her side, whispering, "Hold on, honey, Mom is here with you." After endless hours, the first clear, loud cry was heard. One of the nurses exclaimed, "It's a healthy girl." I sighed with relief, tears rolling down my cheeks. Amanda, exhausted, smiled weakly, her eyes shining with happiness. I took her hand, feeling the weight of the world lift. But then the doctor frowned. He put the stethoscope back on Amanda's abdomen, noticing it hadn't dropped much yet. He looked up, surprised. "Wait, this isn't over. There's another baby." The room fell silent. I stood motionless, unable to believe it. 15 minutes later, another cry broke the air, stronger, more vibrant. The doctor lifted the baby, his voice trembling. "My God, it's a boy. She's had twins, a boy and a girl." I embraced my two grandchildren, overwhelmed by a mix of joy and sadness. I looked at Amanda, who was smiling amidst her exhaustion, and I knew we had passed the hardest test. Days later, when Amanda and the babies were out of danger, I went to the private hospital where she had had the ultrasound. I asked to see the doctor who had read the results. He was a middle-aged man with a tense demeanor, who explained mechanically, "The pregnancy was still early. It's possible the boy was hidden behind the girl, and that's why he didn't show up on the sonogram." His explanation didn't convince me. I knew something wasn't right, but I decided not to push it. Instead, I made a decision. Matthew, the boy, would be our secret. The outside world, people like the Hawthorns, had rejected a baby just for her gender. They didn't deserve to know of Matthew's existence. I looked at Amanda, at my two grandchildren, and I promised myself, we will raise them with love, far from the deceit and cruelty of that family. I never thought the Hawthorns would dare to knock on my door again, and after everything they did that rainy night, when they kicked my daughter out of their house like she was trash, I thought they had severed all ties forever. But I was wrong. In reality, they never stopped watching us, waiting for the right moment. And now, upon hearing rumors about the twins, they showed up at my house, bringing their hypocrisy and greed out in the open. After Amanda brought little Lily out, the three Hawthorns remained motionless on the sofa. The air in my small living room became thick, as if their presence had absorbed all the oxygen. Lily, in her pink bunny pajamas, yawned and rubbed her eyes, oblivious to the cold stares focused on her. Amanda stood, holding the girl tightly, her face serene, but her gaze sharp as a knife. I knew she had learned to hide her pain, though I could feel her internal trembling in the way she pressed Lily against her chest. Mrs. Eleanor was the first to break the silence. She forced a crooked smile. Her red, painted lips trembled, trying to maintain a perfect facade. "A girl," she said in a hesitant, insincere tone. "How adorable." But her eyes didn't linger on Lily for long. They quickly moved toward the back door, from where the voice of the cartoons could still be heard. Then she looked directly at me, her voice sweet yet cutting. "But we heard Amanda had twins. Where is the boy, Mrs. Peterson?" I felt my heart sink, but I remained calm. I slowly placed the cup of chamomile tea on the table, prolonging the moment to hide the rage boiling inside me. "Twins?" I frowned, feigning surprise. "Who told you that? There must be a misunderstanding." I looked at Amanda, then at Lily, and in a soft voice full of tenderness, I replied, "My daughter only has this one child, right, honey?" I emphasized the word one as if to make it clear that Lily was all they needed to know about. Amanda understood immediately. She squeezed Lily tightly and nodded without speaking. Her icy gaze was fixed on the three people in front of her, without an ounce of hesitation. Julian's patience seemed to run out. He abruptly stood up and started pacing back and forth across the room. His shiny leather shoes creaked on the wooden floor. "Damn it!" he burst out in frustration. "All this travel for nothing." He stopped. He looked at me, then at Amanda, with a mix of anger and disappointment in his eyes. Mr. Thomas, always so proper, also dropped his mask of courtesy. He hit the table with his hand. The sound was slight, but enough to make Lily startle and burrow further into her mother's chest. "We didn't come all this way to see some girl," he growled, emphasizing the word girl as if spitting out an insult. "Where is our grandson, Mrs. Peterson?" His question sounded like a declaration of war, as if he had the right to demand something they themselves had despised. His words ignited my anger, but it quickly faded, replaced by sheer contempt. I looked at them one by one, at Mrs. Eleanor with her fake smile, at Mr. Thomas with his air of superiority, and at Julian, a coward, unable to face the truth. They hadn't come out of remorse. They hadn't come out of love. They had come for Matthew, for the heir grandson, for what they considered the pride of their lineage. For them, Lily, my little granddaughter, simply didn't exist. I stood up. I walked straight to the front door and opened it wide. The cold air rushed in, bringing with it the last of the rain. I turned to them and said, my voice calm but firm, "If you have only come to look for the legitimate grandson, I'm sorry, you have the wrong house. Here there are only children who are loved." I lifted my chin toward the exit and added without hesitation, "You can leave." Mrs. Eleanor turned red with fury. She jumped up, pointed a finger at me, and shouted, trembling with rage, "How dare you!" But I didn't move, and I looked her directly in the eyes and replied, my voice serene, "I dare. This is my house, and I do not welcome those who treat their grandchildren like merchandise." My words fell like a steel wall between us. I saw the confusion in Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, the powerlessness in Mr. Thomas's. But Julian, he just stood still, looking at Amanda and Lily. For a moment, I perceived a flicker of remorse in his gaze, as if he remembered what he had lost, but that light was instantly extinguished by his father's icy look. They left crestfallen, leaving the basket of gifts unopened. I slammed the door shut. The dry sound echoed like a final declaration. Amanda was behind me, hugging Lily, and her shoulders were trembling. I turned and embraced them both, feeling the warmth of Lily's small body and Amanda's fast heartbeats. "Mom," the young woman murmured, her voice choked. "Don't be afraid, honey," I told her firmly, though I was still shaking inside. "I won't let them hurt you or the children again." The weeks following the Hawthorns' visit passed in a false calm. My small house was still filled with the laughter of Lily and Matthew, but I couldn't shake off a sense of unease. I became more cautious. I no longer let the children play outside as before. Every time I took them to the backyard, I looked around, checking if anyone was watching from afar. I didn't want them to notice my fear, but every time a car drove past the house, my heart sank. One afternoon, as I was mending Matthew's torn sweater, Mrs. Carmen, my kind neighbor, knocked on the door with a plate of fresh banana bread. She sat down, took a sip of her tea, and commented casually, "There's been a strange man roaming the corner these days, asking about your house, Mrs. Peterson." She spoke with curiosity, without ill intent, but her words pierced me like a needle. "What did he ask?" I said, trying to sound calm, though my hands tightened around the needle. Mrs. Carmen shrugged. "He asked where you lived, how many people lived here, and also about the children. I didn't tell him anything, just that he should look for himself." I smiled gratefully, but when she left, I stood motionless, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my neck. I knew right away that the Hawthorns hadn't given up. They had sniffed out Matthew's trail and wouldn't stop. That night, right after dinner, as Amanda and I were finishing feeding Lily and Matthew, who were playing with colored blocks in their room, the doorbell rang. The dry, metallic sound was like a warning. Amanda looked at me worriedly, then instinctively picked up Lily, protecting her. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it, prepared for whatever was waiting. Under the yellowish light of the porch, there were only Julian and his father, Mr. Thomas. There was no gleaming Mercedes this time, but an old sedan, as if they had chosen it on purpose to appear humble, to hide their true intentions. Julian stood in front of the door without his elegant suit, wearing a simple gray sweater, but I immediately recognized that the look of remorse on his face was carefully rehearsed. He lowered his head, looked at the ground, and said in a trembling voice, "Mother, the last time was because we were very shocked. We ask you and Amanda to forgive us. We were just tired." His words sounded like a memorized lesson, without a hint of sincerity. I crossed my arms, blocking the entrance without inviting them in. Tiredness is no excuse for denying your own flesh and blood, I replied with a cold voice, showing no emotion. Mr. Thomas stepped forward. His tall figure seemed to try to impose itself on me. His tone was calm, but it hid a threat. We know everything now, Mrs. Peterson. We know Amanda had twins, a boy and a girl. Our investigators saw them at the park. His words were like a bullet shattering the wall I had built to protect my family. I felt the blood rush to my head, but I forced myself to remain calm, not showing that it affected me. I looked him directly in the eyes without the slightest trace of fear. "You're men," I asked ironically. "So you spy on us as if we were criminals?" Julian looked up for the first time, looking directly at Amanda, who was behind me holding Lily. "Amanda, I beg you," he said, his voice trembling, but I knew it wasn't true repentance. "Let me see my son. I want to be his father." He emphasized the word son as if Lily, the granddaughter Amanda was holding, didn't exist. His words made me lose control. I let out a dry laugh that echoed in the silence. "Be a father?" I said sharply. "You gave up that right 3 years ago when you let my daughter kneel in the rain, when you said the baby in her womb never existed." I took a step forward, pronouncing each word firmly. "If you truly miss your children, here's my daughter and my granddaughter. But you treated them like garbage. You don't deserve to see any of my grandchildren again." My words were implacable, like a steel wall. I saw Julian's eyes waver, but Mr. Thomas's face remained hardened, like a man who doesn't accept no for an answer. At that moment, I heard small footsteps from inside. Matthew, curious like any child, ran toward the front and hid behind my legs, looking at them with his big eyes. "Grandma, who are they?" he asked in an innocent voice, not understanding anything, but his question pierced my heart. Julian and Mr. Thomas's eyes fixed on Matthew, full of desire and greed. I could clearly see what they wanted, not love, but what they called the heir. Gently, I pushed Matthew inside and closed the bedroom door, shielding him from those stares. "Go play with your sister, honey," I said in a sweet voice, trying not to let him notice the tension. Mr. Thomas's mask finally dropped. He stepped closer. His voice sounded like a threat. "Don't you dare act like this. You are preventing us from seeing our grandson. We will sue you." Julian intervened in a firmer tone, as if he had regained his courage. "The law will be on our side. The boy needs his father. He needs a better future than this miserable place." The word miserable was like a slap in the face. I looked around my small house where I had raised Amanda and was protecting my grandchildren. It might not be luxurious, but it was full of love. And he, who had abandoned his own flesh and blood, dared to call it miserable. I looked directly into their eyes without an ounce of fear. "Do it," I said, my voice calm but cold. "I'm not afraid of liars. I'm ready to face you in court." I took a step back, put my hand on the doorknob, and slammed the door shut in their faces, the dry sound of the bolt resonating like a firm declaration. They had no place in our lives. Just 1 week after the Hawthorne family left my house with faces full of anger, a mail carrier appeared at the door. He handed me a thick envelope with the red seal of the county courthouse. I stood there with the envelope in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. I knew immediately what I had been dreading. I went inside the house, opened the envelope, and every line of the lawsuit felt like a stab. The Hawthornes were demanding the recognition of paternity between Julian and Matthew, in addition to claiming full custody of Matthew Hawthorne. They had even given the child their last name, as if he were an object they could appropriate. Amanda, sitting beside me, read the document with trembling hands as silent tears fell down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, her voice broken. I hugged her tightly and tried to remain firm. "Don't be afraid, Amanda. The truth will be on our side." But inside, I was also trembling, not out of fear of losing, but because I knew this battle would drag my family into a new storm. The next morning, opening the region's most important newspaper, a scandalous headline jumped out at me. "The Hawthorne family tragedy: selfish grandmother prevents access to her legitimate grandson." It was accompanied by a carefully staged photo, Julian, looking haggard, sitting next to his elderly parents, Mrs. Eleanor dabbing her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. The content of the article was a complete lie. They claimed they had been misled about Matthew's existence, that they had tried to reconcile, but that Amanda and I had prevented it. Worse still, they insinuated that we were keeping the boy to extort money from his wealthy family. I read those words, gripping the newspaper until I crumpled it, as rage flooded me, quickly replaced by deep sadness. They not only wanted to take Matthew away from me, but they also wanted to destroy our honor, making us look greedy and cruel to the world. The consequences of the article arrived immediately. That morning, I took Lily and Matthew to the market. As always, the children held my hands, telling me stories from their preschool, but I noticed the strange looks around us. The vegetable vendor who used to greet me cheerfully now just weighed the produce in silence before turning away. A nearby fruit vendor muttered to a customer, "How grasping, keeping the kid to squeeze money out of the rich people." I heard every word like needles in my heart. I squeezed Lily and Matthew's hands and forced a smile so they wouldn't notice anything, although my soul was heavy. On the way back, Matthew innocently asked, "Grandma, why didn't the vegetable lady give me a lollipop today?" I just stroked his head and replied, my voice catching, "She ran out of lollipops. I'll buy you one tomorrow, okay?" But deep down, I knew it wasn't about lollipops, but about the judgment of the outside world. The monthly meeting of the book club, where I once found joy sharing books and stories, had become an invisible border. The president, who used to invite me for tea, suddenly changed the topic of the day to the importance of family lineage. My old friends avoided meeting my eyes. Some murmured among themselves when I passed by. I tried to stay for a few minutes, but the atmosphere became unbearable. I got up, packed my things, and left in the middle of the meeting. Outside, the light of the setting sun fell on my shoulders, but I felt more alone than ever. The betrayal of those I thought were friends tore at my soul. I wondered if there was still room for truth in this world, but I knew I couldn't sit back and wait. I couldn't allow the Hawthorns to continue inventing their story full of lies. I went to find Mr. Rojas, an old friend of my late husband. Mr. Rojas was already retired, but his reputation as a fair man still resonated in the town. I went to his house, a small home with a garden full of yellow daisies. He listened attentively as I told him everything, from the night Amanda was kicked out of the Hawthorns' house to the time they showed up demanding to see Matthew. When I finished, he nodded, his gaze serious but warm. "Mrs. Peterson, I will help you with this case, not for money, but for justice." His words were like a ray of light in the midst of darkness, and I felt that I was no longer alone. We started gathering the evidence. I returned home and opened an old wooden box that I kept in the closet where I stored family memories. Inside was Amanda's divorce file with the document signed by Julian, where he voluntarily renounced all rights and responsibilities over the unborn child. I also found a yellowish sheet of paper that Julian had angrily written, throwing it at Amanda along with a check, where he cruelly stated, "I want nothing to do with you or that child." Every time I read that sentence, I felt deep pain, but I also knew it was our best weapon. Additionally, I prepared the documents that proved that for 3 years, Amanda and I had covered all the expenses of raising the children. Milk, diapers, doctor's appointments. Not a single dollar came from the Hawthorns. Every receipt, every bill was proof of our strength, and I kept them all in a thick folder. Meanwhile, the Hawthorns' lawyer constantly appeared in the newspapers, giving interviews in a tragic tone. They spoke of the pain of a separated family, of the love they felt for a grandson they had never met. Every word was a layer of false paint, hiding their selfishness and greed. Amanda and I decided to remain silent. Mr. Rojas told me, his voice calm but firm, "Let them talk, Mrs. Peterson. The more they talk, the more mistakes they will make. We will speak only once in the courtroom." His words gave me strength, although the worry persisted. Every night I sat in the living room, watched my grandchildren sleep, and wondered, if we lose, how can I protect them? The night before the trial, Amanda and I sat across from each other in the living room. The yellow light of the lamp illuminated her face, making her look both strong and fragile. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "what if we lose?" Her question pierced my soul, but I took her hand and pointed to the pile of documents on the table. "The truth is here," I replied firmly, "and the truth never loses." I tried to smile to reassure her, but inside, I could only pray. I prayed for justice, for my grandchildren, and for Amanda, who had already suffered too much. On the day of the trial at the city family court, the room was charged with tension. The air was thick, filled with curious glances. To the left, reporters waited with their cameras, ready to turn our story into sensational headlines. To the right, neighbors from the town, some of whom had once been friendly, now turned their backs on me. I saw them murmuring, pointing, and felt a knot in my chest. Amanda, Mr. Rojas, and I were seated in the front row. Amanda squeezed my hand tightly, her fingers ice cold, seeking refuge in my presence. I gently stroked her hand, trying to convey calm, though I myself struggled to maintain it. On the other side, the Hawthorne family sat with straight backs like cold statues. Julian wore his most expensive suit, but his face was pale and his eyes empty, as if trying to hide his anxiety. Mrs. Eleanor wore dark sunglasses, looking more like someone on vacation than a person at a trial, and Mr. Thomas maintained an iron expression like a man used to giving orders and never losing. Seeing him, a cold anger ran down my back, but I repeated to myself that I had to remain calm. This was not just a battle for Matthew, but also for my family's honor, for everything we had endured. The Hawthorne's lawyer, a young man with a neat appearance, stood up to begin his opening statement. He spoke with great eloquence, as if performing in a crowded theater. He spoke of the sacred paternal bond that had been broken, of the pain of grandparents who couldn't see their grandson. He showed invoices for expensive toys and children's clothing that the Hawthornes had recently purchased, as if they were proof of their affection. I looked at those invoices and felt my stomach clench. Those things weren't for love, but part of the spectacle they had staged to keep Matthew. Then he called his witness, and my heart stopped when I saw the book club president take the stand. That woman who had invited me for tea, who used to smile kindly, now avoided my gaze. She testified in a monotone voice. The Peterson family seems to be living much better lately. I heard they receive money from somewhere. Her words were like a knife, insinuating that we were using Matthew for gain. The room murmured, and I felt the stares piercing me as if I were a greedy, selfish woman. Amanda squeezed my hand tighter, and I knew she was holding back tears. When it was our turn, Mr. Rojas didn't rush. He called me as the first witness. I stood up, my legs trembling but my heart firm. As I took the stand and looked at the room, I felt that my entire life was being judged. The Hawthorne's lawyer looked at me with a mocking smile and threw a provocative question. Mrs. Peterson, you held on to the boy, hoping to get some benefit from my client's wealthy family, correct? The room murmured again, and the sound was like needles sticking into my chest. I took a deep breath, looked him in the eye, and then turned toward Julian, saying in a low but firm voice that resonated throughout the room, Benefit? I have only cared for what you abandoned. I began to speak, every word coming from the depths of my soul. I recounted that rainy night 3 years ago when I found Amanda kneeling in front of the Hawthorne's gate, her belly swollen and the baby's clothes thrown in the mud. I described Julian's silhouette behind the curtain, watching her without coming out to help. I recounted the days and nights that followed when Amanda and I faced everything alone, without a single dollar of help from the Hawthornes. Silence fell over the room. Only my voice could be heard, steady but full of strength. I saw some people lower their heads, others wiping away tears. I wasn't speaking to inspire pity. I was speaking so the truth would come to light. Mr. Rojas stood up and began to present the evidence. The large screen in the courtroom lit up. First, he read aloud the clause from the divorce decree, where Julian voluntarily signed away all rights and responsibilities over the unborn child. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a severe gaze, asked Julian to confirm the signature. He muttered, barely audible, "Yes, it's mine." The entire room gasped, and I watched his face turn even paler. Then Mr. Rojas presented the original handwritten letter from Julian to the judge and projected the image onto the screen. The phrase, "I want nothing to do with you or the baby," appeared clearly, like a stab that shattered the Hawthorne family's pretense. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Reporters started taking photos nonstop. I looked at Julian. His head was bowed, and his hands were clenched on the armrest of the chair. Mrs. Eleanor took off her dark glasses, her eyes filled with panic, while Mr. Thomas remained motionless, as if trying to preserve the last shred of his pride. Finally, Mr. Rojas opened the old file and pointed out that there was a record that Amanda was expelled from the house while pregnant and that the Hawthorns only paid a small sum of money to silence the matter. His voice became firm. They did not deny their actions, Your Honor. They only paid to hide them. His words fell like a hammer blow, leaving the Hawthorns' lawyer without a reply. He tried to defend himself, looking for tangled arguments, but everything was useless in the face of such evident proof. The judge looked directly at the Hawthorne family with a severe but fair expression. "This trial is not about paternity, but about honor and responsibility," she said, her voice resounding. "It is clear that you abandoned this child 3 years ago." She struck the gavel forcefully on the desk. The dry sound marked the final sentence. "The court rejects Mr. Julian Hawthorne's petition. The legal custody of the minors, Matthew and Lily Peterson, belongs exclusively to their mother, Miss Amanda Peterson, and their grandmother." I felt as if the whole world had stopped. Amanda hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I hugged her back, feeling the warmth and relief emanating from both of us. Mr. Rojas smiled, placed his hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "We did it, Mrs. Peterson." I looked over at the Hawthorne side. The two elders had their heads down and Julian remained motionless, his face pale as paper. At that moment, I didn't feel satisfaction, but a deep sadness. They had lost, but the price of their selfishness and lies was something they would carry for the rest of their lives. As the courtroom door closed behind us, I walked out with Amanda. The crowd of reporters surged forward with microphones and cameras pointing at us. This time, their stares were not of judgment, but of empathy, as if they finally understood a little of our story. Mr. Rojas, with his usual calm, stepped forward and raised his hand to hold them back. He only said one short sentence in a firm voice. "Justice has been served." I looked at him with a heart full of gratitude. Those words, although simple, felt like a fresh breeze that dispelled some of the weight I was carrying inside. On the other side, the Hawthorne family was not so lucky. They were surrounded by reporters. Flashes wouldn't stop blinking, and the shouts of the public filled the air. Julian, his face ashen, tried to push his way through the crowd while Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Eleanor needed bodyguards to reach their car. I watched them leave crestfallen, and again I felt no pleasure, only a deep sadness. They had dug their own grave, and now they had to pay the price for their selfishness and deceit. The next morning I woke up early. I prepared a cup of chamomile tea and opened the region's largest newspaper. The headline jumped out at me. "The truth behind the Hawthorne family case. Denied visitation rights due to gender discrimination and family abandonment." The article detailed the hearing, from the irrefutable evidence we presented to the clumsiness of the Hawthorne's lawyer. It revealed the real story. The night Amanda was kicked out of her home, Julian's handwritten letter full of venom, and the truth that the Hawthornes were never interested in Lily simply because she was a girl. I read with trembling hands, not from anger, but because the truth had finally been recognized. My family's honor, which they tried to stain, was now restored. The consequences for the Hawthornes arrived faster than I imagined. Within days, an important international partner of the Hawthornes construction company announced the cancellation of their contract with a clear reason. "We do not collaborate with a company whose leadership lacks ethics." Their stock plummeted, and I heard that other investors also began to withdraw their money. Mr. Thomas, always so proud of his position, was forced to resign as chairman of the board of directors, a direct blow to his pride. Mrs. Eleanor, who had always lived for appearances, truly fell ill. She didn't dare leave the house and cut off all social contact, as if she wanted to hide from the judging eyes. I didn't feel pity, but not joy either. They reaped what they sowed, and I only wish they would leave my family in peace. But Julian, instead of repenting, became more resentful. I heard that he felt publicly humiliated, stripped of everything. For someone like him, failure is never easy to accept. Months later, the New England High Society murmured the news. Businessman Julian Hawthorne, engaged to Miss Valerie Ledesma, only daughter of the National Bank president. Their wedding was lavish, 10 times more luxurious than the one he had with Amanda. Photos in the newspaper showed an elegant Julian next to a radiant bride in a garden full of flowers and lights. It was said he was trying to pick himself up, to prove he was still a winner, that he could have something better. But looking into his eyes in those photos, I saw an unmistakable emptiness. Our life, meanwhile, slowly returned to normal, although a different normal. One morning, Mrs. Carmen, the neighbor who had warned me about the suspicious men, knocked on my door with a plate of banana bread. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm sorry," she said, her eyes full of guilt. "I believed the lies in the newspapers. I was wrong." I smiled, accepted the plate, and invited her for tea. The women from the book club also started contacting me again, inviting me to the meetings. One of them, Mrs. Rosa, even sent me a handwritten letter telling me she was ashamed for having doubted me. I read the letter with relief, though not without a certain sadness. My family's honor had been restored, but the scars from the days of the trial were still there, latent in my heart. Amanda changed throughout this time. She no longer cried or held a grudge. One afternoon, while folding Lily and Matthew's clothes, she came in with a newspaper featuring Julian's lavish wedding. I waited for some reaction, a tear, a bitter word, but Amanda simply folded the newspaper calmly and left it on the table. "I don't care anymore, Mom," she said, her voice serene but firm. "He can live whatever life he wants, but I have Lily and Matthew. That's enough." I looked at her and saw that strength had replaced the old pain, and I felt a deep pride in my chest. That night, as I read a story to Lily and Matthew before bed, I glanced at the newspaper still on the table. The wedding photo of Julian and Valerie Ledesma gleamed under the light, but I only smiled to myself. I thought, a person who tries to prove they are happy is usually the emptiest inside. I didn't think it to mock Julian, but because it was a truth I had learned over the years. True happiness is not in what is shown to the world, but in moments like this, when I sit here listening to my grandchildren's laughter and feeling the warmth of my family. 3 years have passed since the trial, and our life has found a new rhythm, though it's not always easy. Amanda got a part-time job as a bookkeeper at a small bookstore downtown. She doesn't earn much, but it's enough to have her own income, and most importantly, to regain her confidence. I see how her eyes shine every time she talks about the new books arriving or when she helps a customer find their favorite novel. Those moments give me peace, as if I'm watching the wounds the Hawthorne family left behind slowly heal. Matthew and Lily are now 6 years old and have started elementary school. Matthew is a restless boy, always running around the house, hugging his soccer ball as if it were a treasure. He can spend all day playing in the backyard with the neighborhood kids, smiling even when drenched in sweat. Lily, on the other hand, is quieter. She likes to sit by the window and draw. Her drawings, full of daisies, fill my heart with a warmth that is hard to explain. These two children are the joy and light of this house. Every night when they cuddle up next to me to listen to a story or laugh at some silliness, I feel that everything we've been through has been worth it. Sometimes I still hear rumors about the Hawthorne family. Their company managed to emerge from the crisis thanks to the Ledesma's support, but they never regained the prestige they once had. Mr. Thomas is now just a shadow of his former self and rarely appears at social events. Mrs. Eleanor, who lived dependent on appearances, practically disappeared from high society parties. I don't think much about them, but those stories reach me as a reminder that justice, although slow, always finds its way. One autumn night, with the air a bit chilly, I was clearing the table after dinner. Amanda was checking Lily and Matthew's homework, smiling occasionally when Matthew showed her an exercise the teacher had praised. The house was calm. Only the rustling of the notebooks and the children's whispers could be heard. Then the doorbell rang, two sharp, dry knocks like a knife cutting the silence. My heart skipped a beat as if the memories of the confrontations with the Hawthorns had suddenly returned. Amanda looked up with a flash of worry. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and went to open the door. Under the yellowish light of the porch, I saw Julian. He was no longer the same man from 3 years ago. Without his elegant suit or his arrogant look, he wore a worn coat. He looked thin with a grown beard and a haggard face. The deep circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. He stood there hunched over like a man defeated by life. He murmured in a hoarse voice, looking at the ground. "I haven't come to claim the children, I just want to apologize." I stood in silence in front of the door, not inviting him in. I wanted to hear what he had to say, but inside me, there was no room left for trust. He took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice choked, as if every word was a struggle to pull from deep within. He spoke about his marriage to Valerie Ledesma, more of an economic contract than a love story. She is beautiful, but cold, he said with a bitter smile. She always wants to control everything, always jealous of my past. She says I'm a failure because I couldn't keep my children. He recounted that they had tried all kinds of treatments, both in and out of the country, but after 3 years they still couldn't have children. The doctor said the problem was Valerie's, but the Hawthorne family didn't dare confront her, as their company depended on the National Bank owned by her father. He described his luxurious mansion as a cold tomb, without laughter or warmth. Every night, he said, his voice breaking, I go to bed in an empty room and I hear children's laughter. I imagine Matthew and Lily. I imagine them saying Daddy for the first time, taking their first steps. I destroyed all of that with my own hands. He looked up with pleading eyes, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. I had everything in my hands, he'd said, and I lost it because of my stupidity and my family's. I don't expect to be forgiven, Mrs. Peterson. I just want to see them from afar, just once. His words sounded like a prayer, but I didn't feel compassion, not because I hated him, but because I knew the forgiveness wasn't mine to give. I turned back into the house and called softly, Amanda, honey, come here. Amanda came out, still holding Lily. The girl looked at Julian with no expression. Her calmness was more terrifying than any anger. Julian watched her like a defendant before his judge, his head bowed. Amanda, he murmured, but she didn't let him finish. Amanda looked at him for a long moment before speaking, her voice quiet and serene. I already forgave you, Julian. A long time ago. He lifted his head with a flicker of hope in his eyes, but Amanda continued in the same tone. But I forgave you, not to get back together with you, or for you to be a part of my children's lives. I forgave you so I could be at peace with myself. Her words were like a clean cut, without resentment or anger, just the truth spoken with simplicity. Then she took a step back, stood beside me, and hugged Lily tightly. Go, Amanda said, her voice not trembling. Julian stood still, as if wanting to say more, but Amanda's gaze made it clear there was nothing left to say. He turned around and walked away under the dim streetlight, his thin figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. After that night, Julian appeared at my house. He never bothered us again. But sometimes on weekend afternoons, I would see his old sedan parked at the top of the street. He never knocked on the door, never asked for anything. He would just stay there near the wooden fence, leaving some things, a remote-controlled car, a set of colored markers, or a box of cookies that Lily and Matthew loved. These gifts were always carefully wrapped, accompanied by a small note written in a shaky hand. For the children. Matthew and Lily, with the innocence of children, always ran excitedly to receive the gifts. The nice uncle is here, Matthew shouted, hugging the toy car tightly, his eyes sparkling with joy. Lily held a box of colored pencils. She timidly murmured, "Thank you," before turning to me to show off. "Grandma, the teacher said I draw really well today." Julian just stood there smiling, but his smile was sad and his eyes were moist. Once he crouched down to quickly hug the children, just for a few seconds, then straightened up and walked away without looking back. Amanda and I watched him from the window without saying a word. There was no anger or satisfaction, just a silent acceptance. The children didn't know he was their father, and perhaps that was for the best. On the anniversary of my husband's death, as every year, Amanda and I took Lily and Matthew to visit his grave. The cemetery was on the outskirts, where rows of eucalyptus trees stood straight, and the leaves whispered in the wind. I cleaned the gravestone and placed a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums on it, my husband's favorite flowers. Lily and Matthew played nearby, their pure laughter echoing in the calm air. I sat next to the grave and whispered softly, "See, honey, we're okay. Amanda is stronger than you thought, and the grandchildren are our greatest joy." Amanda sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder without saying anything. I felt the warmth of her body, and for an instant, a profound peace enveloped me. Then Amanda spoke, her voice soft as the wind. "Mom, I don't feel hatred for Julian anymore. I only feel relief. Seeing him like that doesn't bring me happiness." Her words left me motionless. I stroked her hair and smiled. "You've learned a lesson that many adults never grasp. Sometimes the true victory is not in defeating the enemy, but in finding peace within yourself. Amanda nodded, a new light in her eyes, as if she had just released an invisible burden. I looked at her and saw the maturity that pain had forged in her, and I was filled with pride. When we returned home, evening was already falling. The light of the sunset dyed the small street with its houses hidden among the trees, gold. I was opening the door when I saw Julian there in front of the fence. This time he didn't bring gifts. He was just standing like a shadow, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn coat. His face looked more haggard than the last time I saw him, with deeper dark circles. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no longer a plea, only the exhaustion of someone who has endured too many losses. Matthew and Lily saw him and immediately ran toward him. "Good uncle," Matthew shouted, pulling his hand, excitedly saying, "Uncle, we went to visit Grandpa today. Grandpa is on the hill. There are many pretty trees there." Lily intervened softly. "I made a drawing for Grandpa. Do you want to see it?" Julian crouched down, stroked their heads with a sad smile on his lips. Then Matthew, with the innocence of a child, asked, "Uncle, do you have a daddy? Does your daddy love you?" The child's innocent question was like a knife stab. Julian froze. He couldn't answer. He just lowered his head and squeezed Lily and Matthew's hair tightly, as if wanting to hold on to that moment a little longer. Amanda was on the doorstep, observing the scene. In her eyes, there was no longer a storm, no pain, no resentment. I stood beside her, feeling the strength emanating from her. Julian looked up, looked at Amanda, and then at me. His gaze seemed to want to say something, but the words didn't come out. He turned and walked away. His thin silhouette gradually disappeared into the shades of the sunset. Lily and Matthew ran into the house, laughing and talking nonstop about their day, as if the visit of that kind man had been nothing more than a fleeting moment. I looked up at the clear blue sky where birds were returning to their nests. I felt a strange peace, as if the whole storm had passed, leaving a gentle silence. I didn't know what the future held. Would Julian continue to come every weekend, watching his children from afar? Would Lily and Matthew one day discover the truth about their father? I don't know. But I know one thing for sure: we survived the storm and found our own refuge in the calm. I went into the house. I saw Amanda playing with the children, and laughter filled the place. I smiled. I sat next to them, and in my heart, I gave thanks that my family was still united, no matter how the outside world changed. After everything we've been through, I understood that life is never easy for those who choose the right path. But it is in pain that one learns what it means to be strong. I understood that true love does not come from prestige or money or a last name, but from silent sacrifice and the heart that protects what is just. Happiness is not in mansions, but in the smile of children who grow up surrounded by love. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is freeing oneself from the chains of hatred. I did not win with money or power, but with the faith that the truth, sooner or later, always comes to light. And the most valuable thing I learned was that when a mother or a grandmother stands up to protect her family, no power in the world can make her fall. The story you have just heard has had the names and locations changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I sincerely ask you, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you keep silent to maintain the peace, or would you face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can be a light on someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage will lead us toward better days. At this moment, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this instant.